Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the CAP Guest Lecture Series today, and our first speaker ever from the Construction Management Program, Mr. Michael Key. Michael Key is Vice President of Construction Operations for Milhaus and President of the Ball State University Construction Management Advisory Board. An Indianapolis native, Key started his career with Turner Construction, where he worked on the Indianapolis Zoo's International Orangutan Center, multiple healthcare projects, and on the Hinkle Fieldhouse renovations at Butler University. He worked in Tennessee on a mixed-use mid-rise project, and then transitioned to Milhaus a little over 3 years ago. While at Milhaus, he relocated to Florida to assist in starting their Florida operations, and relocated back to Indianapolis in 2019 to oversee all construction operations for Milhaus. Let me also say, on a personal note, that Michael's an alumnus of our CM program, where he took several of my classes, and he was an outstanding student here at Ball State. It was unsurprising that he has had so much success in his promising early career.
See you.
As Michael presents, please feel free to pose your questions and comments in the chat feature, and after the presentation, Michael will try and answer as many of them as possible. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Jones, Christine, and the entire program for having me on. I'm going to try to keep this as informal as possible. So like Dr. Jones said, if you have any questions, feel free. I'm not going to be monitoring the chat, but Dr. Jones, chime in if you see something that's pertinent for me to stop and discuss a little bit more. So thanks again. I'm glad to be here. Like Dr. Jones said, I graduated from the Ball State program. So kind of the topic today of focus, and I may not fit in the young alumni section too much longer. I'm getting close to being gone for 10 years, but I really tried to focus today's kind of presentation just on kind of my background overview, how I've gotten to where I am today, kind of lessons learned, obstacles that I've come across. So more just a background and kind of history of the experiences, lessons learned I've had. So we'll jump into that, but like I said, stop me if you got any questions going along the way. So jumping into kind of the agenda, Dr. Jones gave a little bit of outline of kind of my experience and background, so I'll go into that a little bit more detail. Touch a little bit on sectors, types of projects, and differences in the industry that I've experienced in my career. Touch on choosing a career path. I can remember at Ball State, and probably just due to my lack of experience in the industry, I probably didn't consider, how many different career paths there are in our industry from a design standpoint, construction standpoint, et cetera. So touch a little bit on that. Different things on how to position yourself to grow upon graduation. And then obstacles and challenges that I've come across and that I expect all of you to see along your career, and then kind of a final recap of those items. So like Dr. Jones said, I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, attended Cicino Memorial High School in Indianapolis, if anybody's from Indy area. Upon graduation of high school, went on to Ball State to attend the construction management program at Ball State. I visited multiple programs across the area and determined Ball State was the right fit for me. Ball State's program was really focused more on the business leadership kind of tools versus kind of the engineering style that you see some of the other programs. So that's why I chose to go to Ball State. Early opportunities and internships. I started and I got involved in the construction industry when I was in high school as a freshman in high school, and started working for Andy O'Brien Remodeling in the residential sector. And that's really what piqued my interest and led me to chase the construction management degree. And then while at Ball State, I worked for James Babcock Electric out of Indianapolis for a few summers. And both of those experiences were boots on the ground in the field, pulling wire, swinging a hammer, and really exposed me to the ins and outs of construction. And then my last internship while I was in school was with the Hagerman Group. It's a general contractor self-perform group here in Indianapolis. They have an office in Fort Wayne as well. And that's really where I transitioned into more of an office aspect and really got my hands behind submittals, RFIs, contracts, et cetera. So upon graduation, I solicited multiple companies and talked to multiple companies and really tried to decide which way I wanted to go with my career, and ultimately decided to go work for Turner Construction, which at the time was one of the largest national GCs here in the US. They actually do international work. I'm not sure where they stand today, but I'm sure they're still in the top 10. So with Turner, I came in as a project engineer. And like Dr. Jones said, I had a lot of experience with healthcare projects, a historical renovation project, and the International Orangutan Exhibit project. Both those are shown on the screen here. Did some other work for Duke Power Company, but mostly commercial, kind of complex specialty projects. So, I think from this experience, I was fortunate enough to get a little bit of field exposure, project engineering exposure, and then I left them as a project manager in their SBD department. I think the SBD project manager role there gave me a step up on a lot of the individuals that were in the organization or in other organizations, and really piqued my growth early on. Turner does a really good job with their SBD division. It's basically special projects that are smaller in dollar value, but allows younger individuals to go take a more leadership role on a project earlier in their career. So I was very fortunate to be the PM on a couple of projects at a very young age, but also get the exposure of some larger projects in Hinkle Fieldhouse, the Orangutan Exhibit, and some other projects. So I spent about 3.5 years with Turner. At that point, I was looking for another step in my career. I thought that staying at Turner, I'd probably have to sit in kind of an SBD project manager of projects ranging from $1 million to $5 million for 3 to 5 more years, and I really wanted to take a step faster to kind of expedite my career growth. So at that point, I left Turner, moved on to the Buckingham Companies, which is a local developer to Indianapolis, really focused on mixed-use, multifamily, hotel, retail component projects. At that time, I shifted to the Buckingham Companies and was asked to travel down to Nashville, Tennessee to act as kind of a senior PE APM role on the project. And it's on the screen as a $120 million project, 350 apartment units, 180 hotel rooms, roughly 25,000 square feet of retail, and like I mentioned, about $120 million. So when I transitioned down to this project, it was supposed to be kind of a short filling a gap of a PE that left the project. That turned into me staying on the project, and about 3 to 6 months in the project, slowly took over the project management role. So this project is probably the single biggest kind of move in my career that I've made to date. I was 26, 27 years old, and was given the opportunity to run this project from basically, we had structure all the way up, exterior framing ongoing, and spent 2 years on this project, wrapping it up to turnover and close out. So an unbelievable growth opportunity that I was given here on this project. It was a very difficult project. It was a design build project. We didn't get official 100% CDs until we were already structurally topped out. So lots of coordination, BIM, hotel flagship was named mid-project, so coordinating with them after the structure was complete and allowing them to design their interiors. Very complicated, but very fortunate to be able to step in and finish this project as the project manager. After that, I took the opportunity about 4 years ago to come to Milhaus. After I was in Nashville, I was approached, an individual at Buckingham actually transferred over to Milhaus to run the construction department here, and asked me to come with. So at that point, I transitioned down to Tampa, Florida. Excuse me. And took on the regional director of construction. So I moved to Florida about 4 years ago, spent 2 years there, starting all of our construction operations in Florida. Milhaus was new to the market, so I played kind of a business development / construction lead down there, building a lot of our relationships with design firms, subcontractors, and so forth. So spent 2 years there overseeing 5 to 6 projects. Most of them have wrapped up at this point or will be wrapping up in 2021. And then about a year ago, I moved back in to take on a vice president of construction role. So at that point, I oversaw all of our owner's rep operations and then our construction operations from a PM, PE, APM standpoint. And then the pre-con and field still stayed underneath another individual. And then as of January 1st this year, I took on Vice President Construction. So now I oversee all construction operations here at Milhaus. So that's from OR services to pre-con to field operations to construction operations. So that's a little bit of a history on my kind of path at Milhaus. Who Milhaus is, we're a national developer, roughly a 10-year-old company, really focused kind of on urban infill mixed use products. So most of our projects have some type of retail component, apartments above, and really focus kind of on that urban core. We focus on city sizes, population of like 15 to 40-ish. You won't see us develop in the big LAs, New Yorks, so forth. We're really kind of focused on city sizes comparable to Indianapolis. We're in Indianapolis currently, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Tampa, soon to be Phoenix, soon to be Denver, et cetera. So really focus on those kind of second tier city sizes. And then in those cities, we focus on kind of the urban core. Rarely do we develop, right downtown center point. We're really focusing on kind of transitional neighborhoods around that urban core, and trying to be really on the front end of development in neighborhoods rather than the back end, and taking a little bit of chance maybe on some unproven markets or neighborhoods, but hopefully being the first one and really changing and revitalizing those neighborhoods. Our project size, our perfect points around 250 units. We have done projects as small as 40 units, and we've done projects as large as 350 units. But the majority of our projects are kind of in that 250 apartment unit range. In regards to structure, we're a full turnkey developer. So we manage the entire process in-house. We, find the land, entitle it, zone it, permit it, bring on a design team that contracts directly with us for design. And then we build everything ourselves in the Midwest. So we GC all of our own projects in Indy, Cincy, Kansas City, soon to be Columbus, Ohio. And then we hire a third-party general contractor for projects not in that geographical region. And then once construction is complete, we hand it over to our property management team who manages it long-term. Our kind of structure is we build to hold long-term. Obviously, if the right price comes for an asset, we always consider to sell, but we build everything to hold long-term. So for funding purposes, all of our projects are privately funded. We hire either high net worth equity or institutional equity on every project. And then Milhaus puts in a piece of equity as well. And then obviously bring on a lender partner for the debt side of every asset. So every project's really treated as kind of a different entity. So Milhaus as an organization, obviously we have an LLC with multiple companies below it. And then every asset of ours is its own LLC and really has its own structure. Good, Dr. Jones, no questions yet? Keep riding.
That's right.
All righty. All right, so that's a little bit about me and my history and kind of how I've gotten to where I am today. So I'm going to jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about the industry sectors and so forth. So one thing I wanted to talk about today, I think one thing that I probably overlooked a little bit when I was in school was really understanding, how many different sectors, how many different options there are in the construction design world. I went to school thinking, hey, I'm going to go work for a GC after school. And that was really all I really thought about. And it's probably just, to my own fault that I didn't do my research and really understand. And a perfect example is, when I was graduating, I was fortunate enough to have a couple opportunities. And two of the main opportunities were Turner and Walsh. Walsh Construction, which is, more focused heavy civil. They do have a commercial arm, but definitely more of a heavy civil contractor. And really, I was reviewing the proposals and was more focused on, location compensation packages rather than, what my long-term plan growth and what kind of sector I wanted to be in. So I challenge everybody to really do some research, understand the differences between residential, commercial, multifamily, industrial, heavy civil, et cetera. There's probably 10 up there, or 10 not listed here, of different sectors. So there's very different aspects of all. Where I am in my career today, me transitioning to a heavy civil would be, probably not a good decision for my career path growth. It's not as comparable to commercial multifamily. It would be easier to transition back to a commercial role if I wanted to go that route. So just understand, the differences and the nuances of each kind of sector as you choose. If you have multiple opportunities upon graduation, I challenge you to really look into the differences. There's pros and cons to all of them. I get slack a lot of times from the commercial industry for making the transition over to multifamily. That multifamily is easier to build. It's not as sustainable. It's wood versus concrete and metal studs. All multifamily is the same, et cetera. And I agree with some of those comments, and I disagree with some of those comments. Multifamily, it's a lot less experienced sub base, so it's a lot harder to manage subcontractors in the multifamily industry versus a commercial industry. So although our buildings may not be as complex in detail, you may be managing subcontractors at a lot lower level of capacity or understanding technology, et cetera. So that's a little bit about that. I think that the big thing here is long-term versus short-term transitions. In your young career, if you make a few transitions from different sectors, it's probably not going to affect your career path. But as you get into one of these sectors and really spend 3 to 5 to 10 years in them, it's going to be a lot harder to transition career-wise, or you may have to take a step back in your growth. So I just suggest on this one to do a little bit more research than I may have 8 or 9 years ago. This is a little bit more in depth to what I just touched on. And this is more kind of the differences between projects. And this can be in multiple different sectors. In college, I probably, we talked about the difference between private and public projects, how they're bid, how they're contracted, et cetera. I probably didn't understand to the extent of how different the public and private market is. Obviously, a lot more constraints on public work. It's taxpayer dollars. It's not a private owner. Very different contract structure from design teams, project team basis. A lot of different reporting requirements. You're going to have a lot more strict reporting on public project for those who aren't detail oriented and like paperwork, public's probably not the route that you want to go. If you're a military background like Dr. Jones and can get in the details and reporting, public may be for you because it's harder to find individuals with that skill set. So just understanding the nuances and differences there. The next one's a big one that I never considered when I was in school. I really didn't understand the development world. I think probably the architecture world gets a little bit more exposure to the differences of like a GC versus developer, or developer versus a private owner building, a commercial project. But I was, my eyes were, opened tremendously after leaving Turner on the opportunities in the development world versus a GC. And it's major differences. And the best way, that I explain to most individuals that I recruit coming from a commercial GC world is, when you're a GC, you're building for a different owner every project. You're building for a client. You may go from a stadium to a hospital. You may be building for IU Health one week, and then you're building for the Indianapolis Zoo the next week. That was fun, and I enjoyed it when I was doing that with Turner. The difference there is you can have a good owner and you can have a bad owner. And, there's no changing that owner mid-project. So, there was a couple projects that I extremely enjoyed the owner, had a good relationship with, and it was a good 6, 8, 12 months, however long that project was. And then there was other projects where it was a very difficult owner that may have not had the experience and understanding of the design construction world. And dealing, with those individuals was very tough. And it's, however long the project is that's how long you have to deal with that, owner. So, in the development world is, the guy that writes my check is the guy that's the owner on every single one of these projects. Yes, we have financial investors on every project that we report to, and, have to appease their request. But, the guy that I work for is the sole owner for the projects we develop. So there's no surprises. So if you can, if you can transition into the development world and are interested in that, and you can find a good owner to work for, it's reassuring coming to work every day that, I know who I'm working for and who I'm building for, and that he has trust in me, and so forth. So I listed a few items below. Owner expectations dynamics, I touched on that a little bit. Very different from one world to another on private versus public and developer versus GC. And that goes in hand with the design team as well. It's not just construction. From a design standpoint, it's very different. Contract structures are very different. In the developer world, we hold the design team's contract. The design team works for us as the developer. Obviously, in a traditional job structure, traditionally owner would hold architect contract, GC contract, and kind of create the project team. So here at Milhaus, we maintain all contracts that are involved in the project. So we have full control. We get to pick who we work with on a daily basis. And those that don't work out, we don't have to, we're not forced to work with again. And that touches a little bit on the project team structure, obviously very different from both private versus public and both developer versus GC. So jumping a little bit more, I just touched on this a bit, but choosing a career path. And I mentioned earlier that this was something that, I didn't probably fully think out when I was in college. I was kind of always, hey, you go work for a GC or you go work for a subcontractor if you want to, go in a more specific, defined scope of work. So as I've been out now, there's obviously, it's been eye-opening on how many different opportunities there are, different structures, different organizations that you can work for or work with a design and construction background. So, I think most people generally think in the construction industry, you go work for a GC or subcontractor. I never really thought out the developer piece. And we've been super fortunate to bring on a few recent grads from the Ball State CM program that come directly out to the development world. I tell people I was fortunate enough to go work for a Turner that, was high-end process and have that commercial experience to bring it here. So, if anyone ever asks, I always say, if you want to go, if you like the develop or you're interested in the development world, but you want to go work for a GC for 2 years to learn the ins and outs of processes on a higher level and get some experience on some more complicated projects and different types of projects, I would always recommend chasing that and going to work for a GC prior to coming over to the development world. But if you're solely focused on development world, I always say, as long as you got the work ethic, we can teach you the development side of things. And then subcontractor, I think this gets foreshadowed and lost a little bit. I think that most people think, hey, I want to go work for a GC because I want to be in charge. Subcontractors report up to the general contractor. There's a lot of talented individuals in the subcontractor market, and a lot of times there's quicker career path growth by working at a subcontractor. They may not have the bench, as deep of a bench with the experience as some of the big GCs in town, and it may give an opportunity to grow quicker. And if you're more detail oriented and want to be in the weeds of one specific scope item, it gives you that opportunity when you're working for a general contractor. I always tell people I'm not an expertise in any piece of construction. I know a little bit about a lot of scopes of items to be able to communicate with those subcontractors. But at the end of the day, they're the expertise in their scope of work. And if I know more about their scope of work than they do, then I probably shouldn't be using them on my project. So, so it's always, a good career path to consider on the construction standpoint. Two other ones that I listed up here, and there's numerous other ones I could list up here, is consultant owner's rep. These are probably more longer term opportunities, not right out of school, but there's a lot of opportunity in either consulting for owners or being an owner's rep for an owner. A lot of these owners that are building complicated projects don't have an on-site construction person or anyone with extensive construction or design background. So a lot of times they'll look for an outside source to bring on as a consultant to help manage design and construction. And I tell our investors, even on our projects, spending $250,000 on an individual on a project as an insurance policy, and as someone who can really watch the construction design aspects, is money well spent. And most consultants that I've seen and met through the industry are great dollars spent by protecting their asset. If you look at some of these private equity investors or high net worth investors on our projects, they could be investing 10, 15, $20 million on a project. And then for them to spend, $150,000 to $200,000 for somebody's salary to cover and be an insurance policy on that investment is dollars well spent. So there's opportunities in that. I would most likely recommend to wait for an opportunity like that once you have a little bit more experience, but always a career path opportunity down the road. And then from a design standpoint, obviously I'm a construction guy, but being in a developer's office, I've had a lot more probably interaction with the design team. When I think of A&Es, and one of my college roommates here works here at Milhaus and was a CAP grad, landscape architecture. I always thought, hey, you're going to go be an architect, you're going to draw drawings, you're going to stamp drawings, and that's the end of it. Probably didn't really ever appreciate and understand the full magnitude of scope options in the design world. Obviously, the typical design path of being an architect, designing buildings, stamping drawings is probably the most commonly known. But a lot of our developers here are design architect graduates who have either gotten an MBA in business, law degree, or just learned up through the ropes of kind of the development world, the entitlement process, zoning, local code, et cetera. And it's been, our four of our developers, 3 of them are my age or younger. So, they've made, and they're vice presidents of development in each of our markets across the country. So they've made tremendous growth by going the development route and really manage a large scope of work here at Milhaus. I listed owner's rep and consultant here. A lot of our ORs and consultants we see across the country, some of them are design focused, some of them are construction. I think it's our perfect OR is somebody who has both experience in design and construction, because really those ORs really are managing the entire project team or being a liaison between the project team and owner, and being able to understand design and construction both is a real benefit to the owner on those, or for that role. Remind me, Dr. Jones, I got 10 minutes and then 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah, we'd like to save at least 10 minutes for questions at the end. Yeah.
All right, I'll wrap up in 10. Perfect. All right, so how to position yourself to grow. I tell my team this, and I probably heard this from Dr. Jones and Mike Mezzo and Miss Fick when I was in school, but I always tell people to look around the room, and I know we're in a Zoom meeting, so it's a little hard to look around the room, but the people in this room, the majority of the people that you're going to, and I say competing is probably not the right word. There's probably a better word for that, but these are the people you're going to be going against to try to grow in your career. There's career growth opportunities at every company, and certain people have different aspirations than other. I have certain team members here that they're satisfied being a PM and they want to be a PM the rest of their life, and they don't want to take on more responsibility. But if you aspire to climb the ladder and grow, it's the people next to you, the people at other companies, the people internally at your company are going to be who you're competing for the next, promotion internally. So if you're not outperforming the individuals you work with, or the individuals you're going to school with currently, the opportunities shrink quickly, because our industry is a tough industry. It's a lean industry, and it's easy. Shouldn't say it's easy to replace, but it's easy to be passed up quickly if somebody's outperforming. So I always recommend look around and determine what your aspirations, your goals are, and if those are to grow quickly, make sure you're working harder and outperforming, your classmates and future coworkers. Opportunities. This is a big one. Weigh the benefits of every opportunity. So my top benefit, what I thought was when I was graduating school, is what's the bottom line? How much money can I make out of school? Looking back today, 9 years later, money is a small portion of every opportunity. So I really challenge you to understand, what the full opportunity is, and the grass isn't always greener on the other side. I've been super fortunate, made 2 transitions in my career in 9 years, and I look back and both of them were great decisions. But I could have easily, made bad decisions, but both decisions I made in my career weren't solely focused on compensation. The first decision I made out of school probably was compensation, and luckily it didn't impact me in a bad way. But there's a lot of companies that will pay top dollar out of school to get in the young talent, and then just run you through kind of the ringer and not really look at what the opportunity is for you long term. Where some of the smaller companies that may not be able to provide a compensation package as a national large GC firm, but is really looking at how do you grow internally, how do we get the best value out of you long term. And I can assure you, if you perform at those levels and they give you the opportunity, that the compensation will come. So just as you weigh your options, if you have multiple options upon graduation, I challenge everybody to really ask the hard questions to the employer that's considering you for an offer. Ask what the long-term plan is, not just 60 days out, not a year out, but what's 5 years out look like. If you perform, what opportunities do they have internally? And that's a big piece why I'm at Milhaus. I'm here for opportunity. I can assure everyone on this call that I would not be sitting in this chair at very many companies across the country, but they don't look at age or experience. There's not a checkbox that you have to have 15 years of experience to sit in a certain chair. If you're willing to work, willing to learn, and build trust, communicate, etc. It doesn't matter what race, what gender, how old you are. Find companies like that will give you the opportunity. If that's an aspiration to really grow, make sure you find a good fit in that regard. I put a last comment: experiences can be greater than benefits in that moment. Going back to the Nashville project where, I became a project manager on a $120 million job. I can assure you it wasn't a fun 2 years. It was 2 years of 7 days a week, 90-hour work weeks. It wasn't fun, but the experience was well worth the bad. The experience of my growth long-term was well better than the experience of that 2 years that I went through. So, there's probably going to be certain times when you may have to do a task or a project that's not fun, but look at the long term on how that will impact you long term. All right, I got to speed up. All right, keys to grow quickly. I won't hit on these tremendously, but these are, and I say keys to grow quickly, my last name's Key. So these are like the 5 things that I tell my team that I think are most critical to continue growth here at Milhaus. And I think this really goes across the industry. Trust is by far the most important item. A lot of people think trust is granted, trust is earned, and it's not earned overnight. But if you can gain the trust of your coworkers, employees, internal, external individuals, that will put you a step up above anyone you're working with. Communication, construction design. There's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds in construction design. An engineer, I communicate with an engineer a lot differently than I can communicate with a subcontractor on our job sites. Understanding how to communicate with different people in a different manner is critical. There's some GCs that are still the superintendent screaming, cursing, to get somebody's attention. I prefer not to do that, but there are a few individuals out there that's the only way to get somebody's attention. So really understanding understanding who you're communicating with and communicating in a way that they best understand is critical. Work ethic. I always tell my team, I can teach you anything you need to know, or somebody can teach you anything you need to know inside of our organization. And if somebody here doesn't know, we'll find an external resource for you. One thing I can't teach is work ethic. And you know, COVID's been a real good exercise to test this with a lot of my employees. It's you send people home to work from home for 6 months. You actually realize a little bit closer on what people's work ethic is. And I can tell you that I've made some changes since COVID hit, purely to the fact that people had to perform in a different setting. And you know, if they couldn't perform in that setting, you know, that if their work ethic's like that when they're not being watched, am I really seeing the full thing, you know, when I am watching them? So something you can't teach. I pride myself as this is something I tagged when I was in college, that I wanted to prove that I had a good work ethic. So I really, you know, challenge everybody to make sure that, you know, when you show up day one for work after graduation, that you prove quickly that you have the work ethic. Relationships is another big one. We're in a very small industry. I know that some people think design construction is a huge industry. It is a big industry, but you know, it's really not that big of an industry. We use subcontractors in Indianapolis that we use in Kansas City. I mean, people travel, design teams design projects for us in Florida, the design projects for us in Indy. So remember that, maintain those relationships, build those relationships, because I can assure you, you know, even when you have a bad project and you may have to work through something with somebody, you're probably going to cross paths with that individual in the future. And then mentors. I've been super fortunate to have a few mentors in my career that have guided me and, you know, given me advice. I was lucky enough to actually have a mentor. I landed a mentor that worked for Turner that was on the BSU CM advisory board, and stayed connected with him for the first, you know, 5-6 years of my career. Unfortunately, he's relocated. I don't speak to him as much today, but having mentors, run ideas off of them, look after you, recommendations down the road is super key. All right, quickly. Obstacles, challenges. You know, there's new obstacles and new challenges on every project. You know, I don't care if you're building 50 Wendy's across the country, each one's going to be a little bit different site, different jurisdiction. So there's no way to mitigate obstacles and challenges in construction design. It's not going to happen. We don't build prototypes. We're never going to solve, you know, every problem prior to breaking ground, starting design, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing here I always tell my team is controllable versus uncontrollable. You know, there's obstacles and challenges we can control, and there's obstacles and challenges we can't control. Focus on the controllable ones, and try to mitigate as many as possible from being uncontrollable. I listed some uncontrollable items here, you know, weather, economical impacts, COVID, unforeseen site conditions. Those are all items that you can try to plan for, but you're never going to nail it down. Don't waste your time on that. Predict as best you can for those uncontrollable items, but really spend your time focusing on the uncontrollables. I listed a few examples here. I'm not going to go through all these because I know I'm running out of time, but just a few project challenges that I've had through my career. I'll talk about the top one. We're building a project in Pittsburgh that was actually on an old arsenal site in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We started construction 3 weeks into or not even probably 3 weeks, 2 weeks into construction. I get a phone call. Bomb squad's en route to the project site. Every municipality, every Department of Homeland Security you can think of is on their way to the site. I get in a car and I drive to Pittsburgh. Fast forward 3 months, we've uncovered 2,500 cannonballs that were buried from the Civil War. So I sat in meetings with every commander in chief of every department for 2 weeks, trying to figure out how we were going to get these off site safely and economically. Nothing we could have controlled, but we built a team, put a team together, and solved the issue as quickly as possible, and really mitigated cost and mitigated the schedule impact. So something that nobody would have ever known. And I can tell you, I've never been in a room with more powerful people in my life. but being able to communicate with them, get a plan together, listen to them, they were the expertise on it, and moving through it, saved us a lot of time and money. Real quick, I always say here's kind of the big controllable one. The biggest obstacle is people. It's how we interact every day. Those items that I just spoke about, you can't control those, but we can control how we interact with people, building relationships, communicating trust. It really goes back to kind of my 5 keys, 3 of those. If you can communicate and build relationships and have trust and gain trust, you should be able to work with anybody, even if you don't agree on all aspects. So really trying to control that and not make people be an uncontrollable item is critical. I know here construction design is messy. There's going to be issues. It's how you manage issues. Try to find a solution before addressing an issue. I always say, if you're going to come with me an issue, you better have some type of solution. It may not be the right solution, but at least some idea on how to solve the issue. And then the last critical piece, and very, very critical, is never hide, walk away, or ignore an issue. In construction and design, time is of the essence, and any issue that takes longer to resolve is going to cost you way more and be more difficult to overcome. So as you enter your career, and you may be younger and inexperienced, not have the experience, if you got to bring an issue to somebody, all I say is bring it to them immediately. Don't try to cover it up, hide it, or so forth. All right, so final recap real quick. Sorry, Jones, I'm a few minutes over.
You're fine. Take your time, Michael.
All right, what to expect and what is expected. So what to expect. The keys I went over, my kind of 5 keys of communication, trust, relationships, etc. Those don't come easy. You're not gonna solve or conquer those kind of keys overnight. It takes time. I still haven't conquered them today. I've grown tremendously on those, but it's not going to be easy to gain trust in people, build a good work ethic, you learn how to communicate with different individuals. Just continue to work on it, have a mentor help you, and get better at it. Also, what to expect. Issues aren't going to be easy. Solving problems aren't going to be easy. I think the focus here is learn and grow, and make them, like I said, are more controllable and not uncontrollable. But they're going to happen. Issues are going to happen in construction design. You're never going to mitigate it. It's how you solve it, how you handle it, and how you respond to it. Work's going to be harder than school. I thought that I was busy in school. My girlfriend's actually in school right now. Now she's in the medical field, so she may have a little tougher ride than I did. But I kind of laugh and I think I annoy her. But school I thought was difficult. It's nothing. School is the real world is way different. There's no bell running out of class. If there's an issue, you're going to be there till 7, 8 o'clock, pulling all-nighter, etc. It's not an easy industry. We're a lean industry, like I mentioned earlier. And there's going to be expectations that, when there's an issue, it's resolved. What is expected? It's expected that you're going to represent your company in a positive manner. I think, social media, etc. Things have changed in our world in the last 10 years. I wasn't a huge social media guy back in the day, but I'm glad today that I wasn't. Just remember that anything on the internet stays on the internet, and believe me, companies look into that when hiring, and not only previous actions, but every action you make. Once you take that job, you're representing that company. So don't make a stupid mistake to represent your company in a poor manner, which puts them in a bad spot, unfortunately. It's expected you'll show up to work on time, work long hours, especially when you're early in your career. I told myself that I was going to work my tail off early on so that I could relax as I got older. Well, I worked my tail off. The relaxing part hasn't started yet. I'm hoping at some point it does. But I advise everybody, work your tail off early, because once you have that reputation, it stays with you, that you're a workforce. And then the last piece is, the value. make sure you're always providing value to the company you work for. Obviously, there'll be a compensation package, but every company is looking at that compensation package and expects you to perform at a level that is that meets that compensation package. So as that compensation package grows and you get promoted, there's more responsibility. If you're not providing the company, if you're not an asset to the company, that's less than your compensation, you're probably close to out the door. So make sure that you are giving the company the work that they expect that they're compensating you for. Economical impacts, make yourself irreplaceable. With technology changing, lots of things changing. We're a lean industry. I always tell people if a computer can do what you do, you're probably not going to have a job for very long. If there's a robot being built that can do what you're going to be doing, probably not a good long-term solution. The good thing is I don't see robots designing or building buildings anytime soon. But just make sure that you cut out, a scope of work at the company you work for that makes you irreplaceable. This is the most important thing that I'll say all day. Reputation, your name. There's one thing you can't change. It's going to go with you forever. If you get married, you may change your last name, but that's not going to change your reputation. I take pride in my name, and I tell my team this all the time, that they should do the same. Once you do one thing unethical, don't show up for work, etc., it's gonna travel with you for a long time, and maybe forever, depending on how severe it is. So every decision you make, just make sure you know that you're not changing your name. It's a small industry, and I can pick up a phone and pretty much find out something about any individual I've ever hired or brought onto the team, just because of how small of an industry it is. So just take that and remember that as you start your career. All right, 2 more things quickly. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. This is extremely important to me. I surround myself, I can assure you that I am not the smartest person on our team, not even close to the smartest person on our team. And I make sure every meeting I have that there's somebody that's smarter than me, that knows the subject of the matter better than I do. If not, then we're not providing, I'm not doing the job I should be doing. So everybody has different expertise, experience, knowledge. Make sure you surround yourself with those individuals. And then lastly, I'll leave you with life's short. It will fly by. I'm almost 10 years out of school. It seems like yesterday I was sitting up at Ball State. Enjoy your work. Because work is the rest of your life. You're going to spend more time at work and people you work with than probably anybody else besides your maybe significant other, spouse, etc. So do something you're proud of. I always tell people there's projects. I can't wait to have kids one day and drive past projects across this country and say, hey, I had a part in that project, or hey, I was actually on that site. I helped build that project, etc. It's something really cool about design and construction. Are the things we create don't go away for the foreseeable future. So take pride in it, so you can show your relatives, family, friends, etc. The impact you've had kind of on the future of our country or internationally. I think that's it, Dr. Jones. Sorry, I went over.
That's quite all right. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael. It was a wonderful presentation. I love hearing all of your perspectives. I do have a couple questions already in the chat, and I would encourage anybody else who has something on their mind that they would like to ask or otherwise contribute to go ahead and type that into the chat. I will just start off with a few. I'll actually lead off. Dr. Warner did say that work is harder than school, in quotes. She said that she's going to tell that to Capstone this week. So for those of you who are in Capstone, you heard it here first, but expect that. So that's a very true statement that sometimes the faculty say that people don't believe, but it is absolutely true. So here's a question for you, Michael, that I'll lead off with. And Alec has questioned, as young project engineers, superintendents, designers, etc., we may find ourselves telling coworkers who have decades more experience than us what to do or what we need from them. And in your experience, how would you recommend we approach these situations while being respectful and maintaining good relationships with those we are working with?
That's a great question. It's a long-winded answer, and very, it's not a straight answer. So, long story short, you're kind of going back to the 5 keys, right? So gaining trust in the individual is the first and foremost. As you gain that trust, you show them you have a good work ethic, you communicate in a professional manner. If you gain those, those 5 pieces, I can assure you that it may take time. It may not happen overnight, but those individuals are going to look at you more and more for feedback, listen to you. And believe me, I've had the age barriers. It's not an easy thing. There's certain individuals out there that you may not be able to convince and change. But I can assure you that if it's a team member that sees the impact and the work ethic you have, they will gain trust over time and listen to your feedback and take your feedback positively.
Thanks, Mike. Here's another question from a designer, and says, from Matt, as a prospective architecture student making a career change through the 3-year MArch program, how did you begin to hone in on your concentration within your field? And was this gained in the field, or were the seeds planted during your time in school? I know you covered this in your presentation, but I want to know when that aha moment was, and when did you have this?
And I believe that question was related to switching from the GC world to development world.
I believe that is correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, I can't say that I really realized when I made the decision, leaving the GC world to go work for a developer. And, when I made that transition, I was still going to work for a developer that had a GC arm. So I was really, focused. I probably didn't fully think through it at the time that I was making the full career change from kind of the commercial world to the multifamily world. And I will note the project that I went to, that I showed in the picture in Nashville, it really was a commercial project, even though it was multifamily. It was a mid-rise project. It was actually probably the largest dollar amount contract that I'd ever, project I had been a part of. So I don't think that I really realized what I was doing at that time, to be quite frank, that I was really making a transition to the development world. But I think making that transition, I was doing it for a career path move to become a PM with larger scope at a younger age. And there was more opportunity there at that company than when I was with Turner. And then it really opened my eyes to the development world. And, I'm glad that I made that transition, because I think that I had more of a interest in development than I probably realized, and really enjoy the, chasing land, understanding kind of the impact on communities, et cetera. So I can't say that I did it purposefully, but, I'm glad that I made that change.
Wonderful. And here's a question. So maybe this relates both to some of your investors and maybe some of your prior experience, but how do you typically deal with difficult owners? So of course you're your own owner right now, but maybe both in the past and maybe a little bit about, not that you would ever have somebody who's difficult on a project, but just in case that did happen with some of your investors.
Yeah, I think going back to the my days in the GC world, it really goes to the communication piece. Most of the issues I had, and unfortunately enough, I only had 1 or 2 projects where I would consider maybe not a bad owner, but a more difficult owner. It went back to communication. I realized quickly that they wanted a lot of information. They wanted to be in the know, and give them all the facts, so that they felt like they were part of every decision being made. Now, I may have not thought that they were maybe experienced or had the knowledge to make those decisions, but at least made them felt like they were part of the decisions. So I think it goes back to communication, and then obviously earning their trust is proving, showing them, hey, I'm here at 6 a.m. I'll be here at 8 p.m. Showing them that, I'm fully engaged in their project and kind of gaining that trust. But yeah, it's lean on your superiors. I leaned on a good mentor and superior at that point, and he understood the kind of dynamic. And I may have had a little bit of a rough ride because of my age, and the owner may have not thought that I was capable of performing the work that we were contracted to do. But lean on your superiors, communicate clearly, and show them that you care and that you're fully invested in their project. On the development side, I've been super fortunate. Obviously I have a great relationship with our owner here. We have investors on every project. Some are easier, more difficult than others, but it just goes back to communication and being transparent. Usually our more engaged investors are what some people consider more difficult. But I like when our investors are engaged, because then there's no surprises. If you have an unengaged investor and they show up and they say, what the heck is this? It's a little harder to explain. But if they're fully engaged and you're communicating through the project and keeping them appraised of all decisions, issues, etc., they feel like it's a full transparent kind of project, and they get more comfortable quickly.
So you had mentioned, and I'm sure some people are probably just about to type in that really great zinger question right now, and I encourage them to do that. But as you talked about communication, but you also mentioned on some of your projects that you were using BIM and really high-tech tools, but you were also dealing simultaneously with some subcontractors that were probably, they probably weren't opening the Revit model themselves. So how do you kind of cross that technology gap sometimes, especially with regard to communicating changes and conflicts and clashes and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to my original kind of deciding what sector you want to go, right? So in the multifamily development world, the BIM exposure is going to be very limited. We have subcontractors that don't have the experience or aren't set up in a way to have BIM, coordination, et cetera. So, if you're a BIM guru, I advise you not to go into residential, construction or multifamily construction. I advise you to go into more high-tech stadium, healthcare work, et cetera. So I haven't had a huge exposure to BIM since I've been with Milhaus. We did use BIM on the project in Nashville, mostly for MEP slab coordination. To your point, there was subcontractors that bid that project that did not have the BIM capabilities, and probably, unfortunately, we probably hired one MEP contractor that probably shouldn't have had been on that project for BIM capabilities. So yeah, it's really subcontractor driven. I mean, going outside of BIM, Procore, I assume most people on this call are familiar with Procore, which is the most commonly used technology kind of project management software, across all sectors. And there's still subcontractors out there that don't know how to use Procore. So yeah, there's every day we have issues with collaborating with certain companies, et cetera. But I will say that, it puts those subcontractors, kind of behind the line if they don't, start to improving on those technologies, just because of the hassle on trying to kind of carry them across the finish line with those technologies.
Wonderful, thank you. Alex got another question. It says, most of the CM faculty have told us from the start that we should not be afraid of leaving Indiana for career opportunities. Guilty of that. How has your movement across the states impacted your success compared to if you had decided to stay in Indiana?
That's a great question. I would have told you when I was at Ball State, there was no way I was traveling. I'm definitely a big family guy. My entire family's in Indianapolis, niece, nephew, brother, parents, etc. Nashville kind of popped up accidentally. They asked me to go down there to help for a short period of time, which ended up being 2 years. And then after that, got the opportunity in Tampa, moved down to Tampa, spent a little time in Chicago as well. It definitely impacted my career growth. I think it's hard to quantify on how it impacted, but I think it showed both of my employers I was willing to go on the road for the betterment of the company. And I can assure you that, the long-term, kind of payback from them was well worth it. They gave me, probably different opportunities than other individuals didn't have because of my, willingness to go on the road and help in other markets. So, is there a monetary value on it? Probably not. I mean, yes, you can make more money by traveling. I shouldn't say that, but is there like a way to quantify on how much it helped my career versus the other aspects of, my growth? It's probably hard to quantify, but if you're willing, if you show your employer you're willing to travel, I can assure you, you'll be more, you'll be in better standing with the company, and they'll look up to you for doing that.
And Dr. Warner did comment that you did say that you weren't going to travel, Michael. So
yeah, I thought never, and I hope that I'm here for, well, it's winter right now. I'm already contemplating making a move.
I'm sure that's right. Well, several people are thanking you and telling you a great job. And I would like to also thank you for your time, Michael. Always wonderful to have you either back on campus or if we have to do it virtually, it's the next best thing. It's wonderful to hear from a young alum who is willing to share his own story so openly. So
Perfect.
thank you. And I appreciate it very much. Any closing words?
No, I'm good. If anybody has any additional questions, Dr. Jones, Warner, all the professors, especially in the CM department, have my contact information. So feel free to reach out to them if you have any additional questions. I appreciate everybody's time, and good luck with the rest of your semester.
Thank you, Michael.
Take care.